My name is Della Whitford. I'm 71 years old, a retired hospitality executive, and a mother to one daughter, Lauren. For most of my life, I stayed behind the scenes. I didn't need applause. I didn't crave attention. I built my fortune quietly, steadily, like the sea smooth stone. My late husband and I started with one small lakeside inn. By the time he passed, we had turned it into a national luxury hotel chain that hosted presidents, film festivals, and yes, weddings. But none of that mattered. The moment I read that text, "Mom, we'd prefer you not attend." It's better for the vibe 3 weeks before Lauren's wedding. 3 weeks after I'd transferred $40,000 to the wedding planner as a deposit. A gift. No strings attached. Or so I thought. I reread the message. "We'd prefer you not attend." No, sorry, Mom. No explanation. Just a cool dismissal. As if I were a liability, a stain on her curated image. Better for the vibe. I suppose in Lauren's world, mothers who grieve with grace and wear worn cardigans don't fit the aesthetic. I didn't respond. My hands trembled. Not from rage, but from recognition. It had been coming for years. The way she'd speak over me at dinners. The way her fiancé called me Dell instead of Mom, though I never gave permission. The silence when I told them I'd be bringing Grandma's sapphire earrings for the wedding. Heirlooms passed down 3 generations. They wanted my money, not my presence. Later that afternoon, my phone rang. It was the wedding planner. Her voice was upbeat, professional, like everything was perfectly in order. "Hi, just confirming the $40,000 deposit has been received. The couple decided to upgrade the venue to accommodate a live jazz band. Super exciting." I sat completely still. My hand brushed against the old china teacup beside me, cracked along the handle. My husband once told me, "Some things break beautifully. They hold more because they've already endured." I inhaled slowly, and then I said, "Actually, cancel everything." There was a pause. "I'm sorry?" "But, ma'am, you're not the bride." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "No," I said quietly. "I'm just the one who owns the $40 million venue you booked. And the catering company you're working with. And the hotel chain where your 200 guests are supposed to stay." Silence. Not from me, from her. I placed the teacup down gently. There was a chip in the rim. Lauren used to drink hot chocolate from it as a child, curled in my lap after school, telling me how the kids on the bus teased her for wearing thrifted boots. Back then, I told her, people don't have to see your value for it to exist. I should have told that to myself, too. She was my only child. I built everything with her in mind. And still, she saw me as someone to cut from the photo. It's better for the vibe. Maybe that was true. But maybe the vibe needed a reminder that without the foundation, there is no house. Without the roots, there is no bloom. And without the quiet woman they were trying to erase, there would be no wedding at all. I didn't text her back. I didn't argue. I simply sat there, one hand resting on the old cracked teacup, a mother, a woman, an owner, and for the first time in a very long time, I felt calm and complete. After I hung up the call with the wedding planner, I didn't cry. Instead, I stood up, walked over to the antique chest by the fireplace, and pulled out the old photo album Richard and I had filled during our early years. The leather was worn, the corners softened by time, but it still smelled like cedar and something warm, like home. Richard Whitford, my husband, the quiet kind of man who didn't speak unless he had something worth saying. He wasn't flashy. He didn't seek applause. But he saw me. In every room, in every storm, he saw me. We met when I was 23, working at the front desk of a crumbling lakeside inn. The carpets were stained, the ceilings leaked when it rained, and there was always a raccoon sneaking into the pantry. I thought I'd only stay for a season. But then Richard walked in with a toolbox and a ledger. He said, "This place could shine if someone loved it enough." I didn't realize he meant both the inn and me. We married a year later. He proposed in the garden behind the inn, kneeling beside a broken hose and a bed of wild lavender. That night, he told me his dream wasn't just to fix the inn, but to build something that could outlive us. A space where people celebrated love, healing, new beginnings. He believed in places that held memory, and so we built one. The Whitford collection began with that lakeside inn. Richard renovated room by room while I handled guest services, budgets, linens, menus, everything that makes a guest feel seen. By the time Lauren was 10, we had 4 properties. By the time she graduated college, we had 32. A private collection of luxury resorts, historic hotels, and hidden retreats, each one holding a piece of us. Richard never cared about profit margins. He cared about soul. He used to say, "If you build with heart, the money follows. If you chase the money, you'll always feel hollow." He wasn't wrong, but Richard didn't just build a business. He built a life where I felt safe to be everything I was: wife, mother, partner, woman. I remember one night, years before his passing, we were sitting out back under the stars. He had just finished writing a letter to our estate lawyer, setting up the trust for Lauren and the succession plans for the business. He looked at me with that steady gaze of his and said, "If anything ever happens to me, I know you'll protect what we built." I didn't respond right away. I was too choked up, but I nodded. I kissed his hand, and I promised. Richard passed away 3 winters ago. It was sudden, a heart attack in his sleep. No pain, they said, just gone. One moment we were drinking chamomile tea by the fireplace, talking about plans for expanding to Montana, and the next, silence. The hardest silence I've ever known. Lauren was there for the funeral, but not fully present. She was distracted, restless, taking calls outside during the eulogy. I thought it was just grief. I wanted to believe it was grief. But now I wonder if it was something else. She didn't ask about the business after he died. Didn't sit with me in his study. Didn't even visit the first hotel again. Her focus shifted. Glittering friends, lavish social events, influencers, curated perfection. She was building something too, but it didn't look like love. It looked like performance. Still, I held on to the promise. I didn't make it out of obligation. I made it because what Richard and I built was more than brick and beam. It was a life we poured ourselves into. It was a symbol of everything we believed, that love could be quiet, strong, and lasting. The assets he left me weren't just financial. They were sacred. They were the echo of who we were together. So I kept everything in my name, not out of fear, out of respect, out of love. Lauren never asked. She assumed, and I never corrected her. Maybe that was my mistake, or maybe it was my quiet way of keeping the promise. Letting the story unfold until the truth needed to speak for itself. And now, standing in front of that old album, I whispered to Richard, "I'll protect it, love. Not because it's worth millions, but because it was made with love." I ran my hand over the first photo of us, young, wild-eyed, covered in paint and dust in front of that first inn. We looked ridiculous and radiant. That night, I slept beside the fireplace. No TV, no lights. Just the warmth of old wood, the scent of lavender, and a heart full of memory. Tomorrow, I'd call the lawyers. But tonight, I held the legacy. The next morning, I poured myself a cup of tea. Chamomile, like Richard always made for me. I didn't even think. I just reached for the same blend, same teacup, same chipped saucer with the little blue flowers, the same one I'd used for over 20 years. The handle had a crack in it, barely visible unless you knew where to look. I stared at it for a long time. There's something about a cracked teacup. You know it's fragile, but it still holds warmth, still carries the scent of comfort, still does what it was made to do, even when no one notices the damage. I held it in my hands like it might whisper something back. I wasn't crying. I didn't feel dramatic. I just felt hollow. It wasn't about the wedding. It wasn't even about not being invited. It was about the quiet erasure, the slow, polite dismissal, the text message that didn't say, "I hate you," but instead said, "It's better for the vibe," as if I was a blemish, as if the woman who had birthed her, raised her, sacrificed sleep and health and youth for her, was now just bad energy to be removed like a weed before a garden party. I brought the cup to my lips, but didn't sip. My hands were steady, but something inside me trembled. Not in anger, not in fear, in grief. Because I suddenly realized my daughter had stopped seeing me, not as a mother, not as a woman, not even as a person. She had made a decision about me without speaking to me. She had rewritten the role I was allowed to play in her life. And she did it through a message I had to reread 3 times to make sure I wasn't misinterpreting it. But I wasn't. She didn't want me there. Not because she hated me, but because I simply didn't fit. And that, somehow, cut deeper. I looked down at the teacup again. Its crack ran along the curve of the handle, thin as a spider's thread. Invisible unless held up to the light. How many times had I nearly thrown it out? How many times had I kept it simply because it was mine? Because it had held so many quiet mornings, so many conversations, so many memories. Just like I had held her. I remember when Lauren was 10 and caught the flu the night before her school recital. She was pale, fevered, wrapped in 3 blankets, and still insisted she wanted to go on stage. I sat beside her all night, cold washcloth on her forehead, whispering lullabies between thermometer checks. She never made it to the recital. But that night, she whispered, "Thank you for not leaving." Another night, years later, a snowstorm hit while she was at college. The campus shut down. Roads were closed. And yet, I drove 4 hours just to bring her a thermos of soup and extra blankets. When I arrived, the dormitory steps were covered in snow, knee-high. No one had shoveled. So I did, with bare hands and a borrowed broom. She peeked out the window and cried when she saw me. We laughed about it for weeks. I was always the person who showed up. Not because I had to, because love demands presence, not perfection. And now, I was being uninvited. My daughter, my only child, had reduced me to a disruption, an inconvenient truth, a woman with too many wrinkles for her aesthetic, too much history for her curated crowd. And what hurt most wasn't the exclusion. It was the implication that who I was and what I had been to her no longer mattered. I looked back at the teacup, its quiet resilience, the way it still held the warmth, even with the crack. I wondered if that's what I'd become, something useful once, something warm, still, but something too old, too flawed, too unfitting for display. I set the cup down carefully, like I was setting down a piece of myself. And for the first time in my life, I asked a question I had never dared whisper, even in the darkest moments of motherhood. Do I have to choose between self-respect and being her mother? The answer didn't come right away. Only the quiet did, and the warmth fading from the tea I never drank. I set the teacup down. The house was too quiet. Even the refrigerator hum felt loud. I stood up, walked to the drawer in Richard's study, and opened it slowly, like muscle memory guiding me, not thought. There it was, his pen. Not just any pen. A black Mont Blanc fountain pen, gold-trimmed, heavy and smooth, a gift from our 20th anniversary. He used it to sign every major deal, every letter of intent, every final contract. And when he passed, I tucked it away in the back corner, unable to even look at it. But today, it felt right. I held it in my palm like a talisman, something ancient, something binding. Then I sat at his old desk, took a deep breath, and picked up the phone. Not my cell, the landline. Only 2 people still called it. One of them was June. The line rang once, then again, and then, Mrs. Whitmore? Her voice hadn't changed. Crisp, professional, but with that undertone of care you couldn't fake. I wasn't expecting to hear from you. Are you all right? I closed my eyes. I'm fine, June. A pause. Then softer. What do you need? I breathed in. I need you to pull all the current contracts related to Eden Rise Estate, Dalton Suites, and the Eden Table Catering Division. Silence. June was sharp, always had been. She didn't need a reason to act, but she always needed to know why. I'm assuming this isn't a routine audit, she said carefully. It's not. Then, can I ask? I just want to take back what I gave, I said simply. June didn't ask anything further. That was what I trusted her for. In all the years working beside Richard, she'd never once broken a confidence. She knew when to speak, and when not to. I'll have the files ready within the hour, she said. Thank you. I need cancellation orders drafted. Nothing by email. Everything in print. On letterhead, understood. And June? Yes? I'll be in the city by 4. Set the meeting for 5. I want to sign everything in person. Another pause. Will you be bringing your daughter? I smiled. It wasn't a happy smile, more a private exhale. No, this isn't her business anymore. Understood. I hung up, still holding Richard's pen. It was heavier than I remembered. Or maybe I was just older. Maybe I felt the weight of what I was about to do. And yet, not a single part of me hesitated. I thought of the Eden Rise ballroom. Marble floors imported from Tuscany. Chandeliers we selected together from a retired estate in Austria. Richard had said, if we're building something that lasts, let it feel timeless. He always spoke like that, quietly, poetically. He built those properties not for flash, but for legacy, for family, for milestones, for the people we loved. And now, those very walls were going to host a wedding, wasn't allowed to witness. The thought didn't make me cry anymore. It made me certain. At 4:42 p.m., I walked into the Whitmore and Blythe legal office in Midtown. June met me in the private conference room with 3 neatly prepared folders on the table. She had her laptop open, but everything else was old school. Hard copies, ink pads, wax seals. Just the way Richard preferred it. She slid the first folder toward me. Eden Rise Estate, initial deposit paid, final balance pending. Still within cancellation window. The second folder, Dalton Suites. Room blocks for 193 guests. full reservation authority under Whitmore Holdings. The third, Eden Table Catering. Menu finalized, but no perishable orders placed yet. I nodded. June handed me the documents. I've written a neutral termination clause for each. No legal pushback expected. But, are you sure you want to do this quietly? Yes. No statement? No drama, I said. No press. No confrontation. She looked at me for a long moment, then placed the pen in front of me. He'd want you to use it. I smiled faintly. He'd want me to protect what he built. One by one, I signed. Not with anger, with clarity. I didn't need to ruin Lauren's wedding. That wasn't the point. I just wasn't going to fund the ceremony that made me invisible. The final paper, the last signature. I pressed the pen down slowly, deliberately, sealing the stroke with steady hands. When I finished, I capped the pen, slid it back into its velvet case, and closed it with care. June didn't speak. She just nodded, one woman to another. A silent pact. This wasn't revenge. It was reclamation. Of dignity. Of voice. Of the things I'd given without condition. Now finally returned to my hands. The call came at 6:37 a.m. I didn't answer it. I was sitting in the garden, with my coffee, wrapped in Richard's old cardigan. The air was crisp for spring, the kind that makes your skin feel awake. The phone buzzed again, and again, then stopped. It didn't matter. Somewhere in the city, things were unraveling. Somewhere in the city, a planner named Kara was dialing frantically. Meanwhile, I imagine it looked something like this. Lauren had just stepped out of her appointment, some final fitting, probably, when her phone rang. Hey, Kara. She probably chirped, distracted. We just wrapped up with the florist. Marcus loved the thistle accents, by the way. What's up? A pause. Then her face fell. What do you mean, canceled? Another pause. What do you mean the Eden Rise contract is void? What do you mean the hotel rooms are gone? The catering, too. That's not possible. Then, slowly, her eyes narrowed. No, I didn't cancel anything. Who would even have the authority to... And then it clicked. She didn't say it aloud, but her silence said it all. Marcus noticed. Lauren hung up, turned to him. Something's wrong. He frowned. What? The venue, the rooms, the catering. It's all been canceled. He blinked. What do you mean canceled? Kara said everything got terminated by someone with full ownership rights. A beat, and then he said the name neither of them wanted to say, your mother. Lauren looked away. I'm going to call her, Marcus said. Lauren didn't stop him. Back in my garden, the phone rang again. This time, I saw the name. Marcus, not Lauren. I sipped my coffee and let it ring. Then the text came in. Did you cancel the wedding? I looked at the words. There was no punctuation. No anger, no exclamation. Just 5 flat words. I waited a moment, not out of spite, but because when you've been quiet your whole life, you learn the value of stillness. Then I typed my reply. No. I just closed what never had my blessing. I didn't hit send immediately. I read it once, then again. It felt honest. It wasn't revenge. I hadn't stormed into their lives screaming. I hadn't demanded an apology or made a scene at a rehearsal dinner. I had simply withdrawn, like a tide pulling back from a shore that no longer welcomed it. I hit send. I don't know what Marcus did when he read it, but I imagine it hit him harder than he expected. He wasn't cruel, not like Lauren could be, but he was complicit. He stood by while the decisions were made, nodding along like it wasn't his wedding too. Like excluding me was just a vibe thing, as Lauren so eloquently put it. And now, the vibe had changed. No venue, no luxury suites, no gourmet catering, no carefully arranged floral arches beneath antique chandeliers. It was all gone, quietly, legally, irrevocably, and not out of anger, out of principle. Because I had never agreed to be invisible. I had paid for every stitch of that wedding, every stem of imported orchid, every chilled champagne bottle, every five-star room, every signature menu item, and they told me I wasn't welcome. Not to my face. No, they texted it, like I was a +1 they could uninvite. I thought of Richard again, how he used to say, "Silence, Della, is the language of power. When you speak, mean it. But when you act quietly. That's how the ground shifts." I smiled. They thought I'd just disappear. Instead, I disappeared everything they took for granted. The phone didn't ring again. I sat in the garden a while longer. The wind rustled the hydrangeas. Somewhere, in a penthouse far above my little backyard, my daughter was probably pacing barefoot on a marble floor, asking herself how a woman she dismissed with a single text could make an entire wedding vanish. But I didn't need to see it. I already knew. The shift had begun, and I wasn't angry. I was finally at peace. The call came that evening, just after sunset, when the sky was a pale lavender and the world felt too quiet. I had just finished tidying up the kitchen. No music playing. Just the soft clink of china and the whistle of the kettle still echoing from earlier. The screen lit up. Lauren. I hesitated, then answered. Her voice came through sharp and fast. "I thought you didn't care about appearances." I didn't respond. She continued, louder now. "Why would you ruin everything like this? Why now, of all times?" I took a deep breath, walked slowly to the chair by the window, sat down. "I didn't ruin it," I said calmly. "You removed me before the first toast." A pause. Then she scoffed. "Oh, come on, Mom. Don't be dramatic." I tilted my head slightly. "Is that what you think this is?" "You know I didn't mean to hurt you," she snapped. "It wasn't personal. It was just a vibe thing." I looked out the window. Just a vibe thing. The words hung in the air like a fog. "You said that before," I murmured. And it was true. You know how Marcus's family is. They're very selective, I offered. Status conscious? Fragile around widows over 65? She was silent. I continued, gently but firmly. "They don't know me. They never cared to. That's not fair." "And you," I said, cutting in without raising my voice. "You didn't think I belonged either. That was clear. I never said that. You didn't have to. You texted it." She sighed hard. "I didn't want drama at the wedding." "And yet, here we are." She paused again. Her voice was quieter this time. "I thought you were above this. I thought you believed in love over money. In people over appearances, I felt something tighten in my chest, but I didn't let it show." "I do." "Then why cancel everything? Why embarrass us?" "I didn't embarrass anyone," I said. "I simply took back what I gave." "You humiliated me, Mom." "No, Lauren. You did that yourself the moment you decided I wasn't good enough to sit at your table." Her voice cracked. It wasn't about being good enough. Then what was it about? A long silence. She didn't answer. So I did. "It was about control," I said quietly. "About shaping an image, a narrative that didn't include the woman who raised you." "That's not true," she whispered. "You're marrying into a family that judges books by their covers. And somewhere along the way, you decided I was the wrong cover. I never meant to. Don't say you didn't mean to, Lauren. You meant to. You chose it. You made a choice. And choices have weight. More silence. I heard a shaky breath on the other end. Then she said, almost pleading, "So, you're really pulling the plug?" "On everything." "I already did. But it's all happening in 2 weeks." "Then you have 2 weeks," I replied, "to figure out how much a vibe is worth." She didn't speak. So I delivered the final line I had carried with me since her message that first day. "If it's just a vibe thing, Lauren, then let the vibe pay for it." Her breath caught, like she wanted to say something, lash out, apologize, defend herself, but couldn't find the words. I waited, but none came. So I ended the call, not out of anger, but because there was nothing left to say. I sat there a while longer, the phone resting in my lap, screen dark now. Outside, the garden lights blinked on automatically. Little glows dotting the lawn Richard once mowed every Sunday. My hand brushed against the arm of the chair. Soft. Familiar. And I remembered the days I sat there with a baby Lauren in my arms, her cheeks red from the sun, her tiny hand curled around my pinky. She used to look at me like I was the whole sky. Now I was the storm cloud ruining her perfect weather. But I wasn't angry. I wasn't bitter. I was just done with begging for inclusion, with paying for rejection, with shrinking myself into someone else's idea of good enough. Lauren would figure things out, or she wouldn't. Either way, I had spoken my truth, and I had spoken it in the calmest, clearest way I knew how. Not with shouting, but with silence, and one decisive act. I remember the first time I met Marcus's mother. It was the engagement party, a sunny afternoon at a rented vineyard just outside Napa. The kind of event where even the napkins had calligraphy and the water had lemon slices curled like commas. Lauren wore a pale pink dress. She glowed, radiant and nervous, whispering with the caterers and checking the florals twice over. She'd wanted the day to be perfect. I'd worn a navy blue suit dress. Modest, pressed, respectful. The pearls Richard gave me on our 30th anniversary hung at my neck. A nod to dignity. I was walking toward the main table with a tray of hand-folded place cards. Lauren had asked me to help when I saw her. Marcus's mother, tall, thin, dripping in gold and beige and an air of something sharp behind the smile. She spotted me from across the courtyard and didn't smile. Instead, she walked directly toward me, heels clicking like punctuation marks on the cobblestones. Her eyes scanned me, head to toe, pausing just a beat too long at my shoes, then again, at the pearls. "You must be Lauren's mother," she said flatly. I nodded. "Yes, I'm Della." She extended a hand, limp and cool. I shook it politely. Then came the sentence. "You're more traditional than I expected." Just like that. No smile, no elaboration, just an appraisal, wrapped in velvet and vinegar. I blinked once. "Is that so?" She shrugged. "Well, Lauren's always been full of surprises." I looked at her for a long moment, not because I didn't understand, but because I understood all too well. It wasn't what she said. It was how she said it. That tone, that glance. She saw me not as a guest, not as a mother of the bride-to-be, but as an element to manage, a box to tick. I was the woman who raised Lauren, yes, but I wasn't their kind of woman. That much was clear. The rest of the conversation, if you could call it that, was a blur of polite phrases and passive silences. I excused myself after a few minutes, finding an empty chair near the hydrangeas. And I watched. I watched her float through the party, greeting the right people with familiarity and holding her wineglass like it was part of her lineage. I watched Marcus speak softly to her, deferential, even as he smiled at Lauren across the lawn. And I watched Lauren, my daughter, watch her. That was the moment I felt something shift. A cold little whisper somewhere inside. Be careful. This isn't your home turf anymore. Still, I told myself not to be paranoid. Marcus seemed kind enough, a bit distant with me, but never rude. And Lauren was happy. Nervous, yes, but happy. In love. So I tucked it all away. The gaze, the comment, the feeling of being measured and found. Unnecessary. I smiled through the toasts, the speeches, the little paper lanterns strung through the trees. I clapped as they cut the cake, kissed cheeks, thanked the planners. But that sentence, "You're more traditional than I expected," followed me home that night like perfume clinging to my coat. Now, sitting here weeks after the fallout, I can see it clearly. I wasn't the only one being studied at that party. Lauren was being watched too. I don't know exactly when the shift began, but I saw the signs, the subtle changes in how she spoke, the language of detachment, the sudden preoccupation with image. At first, I thought it was just wedding stress, but it wasn't. It was influence. It was absorption. I should have spoken up then, asked the questions, laid down the boundaries, but I didn't want to be the mother who meddled. I didn't want to lose her before she even walked down the aisle. And deep down, I didn't believe, couldn't fathom, that she'd ever let someone else's values outrank what we'd built together. I never imagined that one day she'd look at me, the woman who raised her, fought for her, built her life around her, and decide I wasn't the right vibe, that I was too traditional. Just like Marcus's mother saw me, like a relic, a placeholder, a charming but obsolete accessory to be left off the guest list. I see it now. I wasn't just dealing with one bride. I was up against a whole dynasty of curated appearances and calculated elegance. And my daughter, my Lauren, had joined them, willingly or not. But what they didn't know was that tradition runs deeper than etiquette. It holds memory, it holds power, and it holds the receipts. The call came in late afternoon. My phone vibrated twice before I picked it up. Lauren. I didn't expect another call so soon after. The last one. I should have let it ring, but I didn't. Mom, she started, voice tight. I need to say something. I didn't interrupt. I'd learned long ago that when people lead with "I need," they rarely care whether you need to hear it. You should have known better, she snapped. You always do this. You always have to interfere. My eyes stayed on the window, watching a breeze flicker through the curtains. Interfere? I repeated quietly. Yes, everything. The venue, the planner, the hotel, the cake. You just had to insert yourself into every decision. You picked my dress, for God's sake. You chose the music, the caterer, the table layout. I blinked. Lauren. No, she cut in, sharp. Just listen. You act like it's all generosity, but really it's control, Mom. You never let me just have things my way. Never. I felt something collapse inside me. I took a breath, steady. I never forced you to pick that dress, Lauren. You sent me 6 options. I simply said the ivory one would photograph better. And you agreed. That's not the point. I didn't choose the caterer. I sent a recommendation because you said you were overwhelmed. You always help, but it's never really help. It's taking over. I closed my eyes for a second. There it was, the revisionist memory, the kind of rewriting that turns kindness into manipulation, support into sabotage. I didn't ask you to pay for everything, she added, voice rising. You just did it. Like always, I finally spoke. Yes, I did exactly, she snapped. And now you think you get to dictate everything. Lauren, I said calmly, I never dictated anything. I showed up. I paid. I filled in the gaps when you were drowning in details. That's not control. That's being a mother. No, she said, almost laughing. That's being you. Always the savior. Always the martyr. Her words cut deeper than I thought they would. All those nights, I stayed up sorting through spreadsheets when the planner went MIA. All the deposits I paid to secure vendors she forgot to confirm. All the gentle questions I asked to make sure she wasn't being steamrolled by Marcus's family. And now this. You think I did all this for control? I asked, my voice still even. I think you never asked me what I wanted, she snapped. You just assumed. I let the silence hang. Then I said softly, I paid, Lauren. But I never tried to buy your affection. She didn't answer. I went on. You're angry because things are unraveling. I understand that. But don't rewrite the past to make your guilt more comfortable. She let out a breath. You think you've done everything right. No, I said. I think I've done everything I could. There was quiet on the other end. I softened. Do you remember what you said when you called me crying? About the venue? About how they were charging extra for every little thing? I offered to help. You said, you always know how to fix things, Mom. And I did. I fixed it. That wasn't interference. That was love. You never listened, though, she said quietly. Not really. You were always so decisive. So sure I felt my heart bend, but not break. I was decisive because you were drowning, sweetheart. Because someone had to be the raft. Sometimes I didn't want a raft, she whispered. Sometimes I just wanted someone to sit in the water with me. Her voice cracked then, and for a brief second, the ache between us felt less sharp. But it still sat there, heavy, real. You think I ruined your wedding, I said. But the truth is, you uninvited me before I touched a single thing. You drew a line in the sand, and now you're angry that I stopped standing on your side of it. I paused. And just so we're clear, this isn't about money. It never was. But when you decided I wasn't welcome, you forfeited the right to what came with my name on it. Her voice was barely a whisper. So that's it? No, I said gently. That's boundaries. She didn't reply. I could hear her breathing, quiet and uneven. And then, the line went dead. I didn't cry. I just set the phone down and stared out the window. Because for the first time in my life, I realized something. She never saw my sacrifices as gifts. She saw them as obligations, as invisible strings attached to every check, every favor, every silent hour spent in the background. And maybe that was the real heartbreak. After Lauren hung up, I sat for a long time without moving. The phone screen faded to black. The room quieted. Only the soft hum of the heater filled the silence. I could have said more. I could have screamed even. But I didn't. Instead, I got up, walked to the bookshelf in the corner, and pulled out a wooden box from behind the old gardening books. A small, lockable chest with worn brass hinges. Something Richard had once joked looked like it held pirate treasure. Inside were documents. Legal papers, mostly. And, on top, his will. I hadn't looked at it in years. Not since the day the attorney slid it across his desk toward me, his eyes cautious, like he expected me to panic. But I didn't panic. I remembered reading it in silence, just reading. Richard had left everything to me. Everything. The house, the accounts, the business shares, the stocks, the hotel group he built from the ground up with 2 other partners back in the 80s. Even the copyrights to the signature RJ collection branding. Every asset, every percentage, every title, all to me. Not because I asked for it, not because I demanded anything, but because he had made a choice. At the time, the lawyer said gently, he wanted to ensure it didn't fall into the wrong hands. And I understood what he meant without needing more detail. Richard's family, his siblings, distant cousins, greedy nephews, had circled him like buzzards when he got sick. They saw cancer as a countdown, not to say goodbye, but to cash in. He saw it too. That's why he changed the structure, moved everything, locked it under my name, not for control, for protection. He trusted me to guard the legacy we built together, not for myself, but for Lauren, for any future grandchildren, for the values we once believed in. And yet, I never told Lauren that. Not once. When she asked about the house, I said, it's part of our shared estate. When she complimented the resort branding, I simply nodded, never mentioning the silent ownership rights that sat in a folder in my drawer. I kept quiet, because deep down, I feared what she might think if she knew, that her mother had taken over, that I had somehow overshadowed her father's legacy. Or worse, that I'd kept something for myself. So I let her believe it was all still his, that my role was minimal, that I was simply the caretaker, because I thought it was better that way, cleaner, less complicated. But now, I saw how that silence had turned into a chasm, one she filled with her own assumptions, one Marcus's family likely widened, maybe even encouraged. I imagined the way they might have phrased it, carefully enough to avoid blame, but clear enough to suggest doubt. Did your mom ever build any of this? Was it your dad who built the empire, or... I wonder what your father would think if he knew how she's running things now. Little comments, planting little questions. And when someone's insecure, like Lauren had always been in quiet ways, it's easy for those questions to bloom into certainty. She probably thought I was holding on too tightly, that I didn't want to let go of power. She couldn't have known the truth, that I never wanted power at all. I just wanted to protect what Richard spent a lifetime building, what we built. I scrubbed floors at the first hotel he opened, did laundry for sheets he couldn't afford to outsource. I cooked for guests when the chef quit midweek. I raised Lauren in a room above the front desk. It wasn't his dream. It was ours. But I didn't say that, because I didn't want to make her feel indebted. I didn't want her to feel like I was hanging it over her head. So I swallowed my story. And now I was watching that silence become a weapon against me. She thought I interfered. She thought I overstepped. She thought I controlled everything, because I never once told her, it's mine, not out of greed, not out of ambition, but because the man she adored asked me to carry it forward. And I did. Every day, quietly, relentlessly, without applause, without conditions. But maybe that was the mistake. Maybe in trying not to overshadow his name, I let mine disappear entirely. I closed the box slowly, locked it again, and for the first time in years, I felt tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep can fix, the kind of tired that comes from carrying something sacred in silence and realizing the person you carried it for never saw it at all. It was late afternoon when I heard the soft knock at the door. Not hurried, not hesitant, just human. I opened it to find Kara standing there, shoulders slightly hunched in a way that didn't suit her usual confidence. She was holding something in her hands, a large white envelope, and she wore no makeup. Her hair was pulled back loosely, and for once, she didn't look like the planner. She looked like a person. "Hi," she said quietly. "Do you have a minute?" I stepped aside and motioned her in. No questions, just a simple nod. She entered, looked around, and chose the same chair Lauren always used as a girl. She held the envelope against her chest like a shield. "I won't take much of your time," she began, then paused. Her voice shook slightly, not with anger, but with something else. She handed me the envelope. "These are the final plans," she said. "Color schemes, seating charts, music, floral breakdowns. It's everything. I wanted to return it to the person who actually paid for it." I looked at the envelope, but didn't reach for it. She set it gently on the coffee table between us. "I don't know what happened," Kara continued. "I mean, I do. I was there. I watched it unfold, but I still don't understand it." She looked at me with glassy eyes. "I've planned 123 weddings, Della. Never once have I seen someone excluded from a wedding they funded." I didn't speak. I just watched her. Let her have her space. She blinked hard. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't be saying this. It's not professional. But after what I witnessed, after what she texted you..." Still, I said nothing. She laughed, soft and bitter. God, if it were me, I would have flipped a table, called the press, filed lawsuits. I don't know. Something. I smiled, faintly. Then I reached behind me, into a drawer I had prepared earlier, without knowing why, and pulled out a small envelope of my own. Inside were 2 spa passes. I held it out. She looked at it, confused. "What's this?" "A weekend retreat," I said. "Mineral springs. Massage. Silence. The kind of silence that heals, not wounds." Her fingers trembled as she accepted it. "You're giving this to me? You look like someone who hasn't exhaled in weeks." She stared down at the envelope, then slowly broke. Not loudly, not theatrically, just a quiet cracking. She began to cry, shoulders shaking but lips tight, not wanting to make a sound. "I don't understand how you're this calm," she whispered, and for the first time, I spoke plainly. "Because silence," I said, "isn't weakness." She looked up at me. "It takes more strength to stay soft when you've been cut," I continued, "than it does to lash out and leave scars of your own." She nodded slowly, biting the inside of her cheek. "I thought," she said, "when Lauren sent that text, that you'd burn it all down. You could have. You still could. You own the venue, the hotel. Even the name on the cake box." I smiled, but there was no malice in it. "Kara," I said gently, "I don't teach my daughter lessons with shouting. I teach her by showing what a woman can be, when she still chooses grace, even after being betrayed." She swallowed hard, then said something I hadn't expected. "I wish I had a mom like that." And there it was, the truth, from another kind of daughter. I didn't reach out to hug her. I didn't offer more words. I just sat there with her, letting the silence do its work. After a while, she stood up. "I'll finalize the cancellations tomorrow," she said softly. "Not because you asked me to, but because I can't support what's happening anymore." She paused at the door. "Thank you, Della. Not for the spa pass, for reminding me there's a different way to be strong. And with that, she left. I stood in the hallway for a while after she was gone, holding the envelope she'd returned. The wedding plans were all there, beautifully arranged, perfect, and completely empty of soul. But maybe, just maybe, what came next wouldn't be. I wasn't the one who spoke first. It was the headlines. I woke up the next morning to a dozen missed calls, 2 from my florist, 1 from the hotel manager, and 1 from a bridal blogger I'd never even met. By the time I turned on the TV, the local wedding segment on Channel 6 was already running the story. Lavish wedding at Dalton Suites abruptly. Canceled days before ceremony. The screen flashed images of the venue, now quiet. No lights strung, no linens draped, no champagne chilling. Just a confused delivery man standing outside with 4 crates of ivory roses. I didn't say a word. I just sipped my tea. They cut to a segment from a small bridal influencer's live stream. She wore pastel pink and spoke fast, clearly thrilled to be at the center of some scandal. Sources say the venue didn't cancel. The owner did. Like, last minute. That's wild. Then came the interview that cracked everything open. A young receptionist from the hotel, clearly not trained for PR, stood in the lobby with wide eyes and nervous hands. "I don't know much," she said, "but I did hear one of the staff whisper that it wasn't a scheduling conflict. It was pulled by the owner herself. They hadn't said my name, but they didn't need to." Within hours, the industry gossip blogs picked it up. Bridal forums buzzed. A Reddit thread titled, "Who Cancels a Wedding Like That?" started climbing. By noon, I received a formal call from the wedding magazine that had planned to feature Lauren's ceremony. They were pulling the story. I wasn't surprised. What did surprise me, however, was what happened next. That evening, as the gossip settled into its second wind, I got a text from an unfamiliar number. It was short, just 3 words. "Are you watching?" I didn't answer. I simply turned the channel. There they were, Lauren and Marcus, caught outside a cafe in Boston, looking tense. The local reporter wasn't invasive, but he was sharp. "Lauren, do you have a comment about the canceled venue?" "We've received confirmation from Dalton Suites management that the owner intervened directly." She froze, visibly rattled. Marcus's face tightened. "We're not commenting right now," he said, tugging her arm. But it was too late. The camera had already captured the look he gave her, not confusion, suspicion. I knew that look. I had seen it once before, when Richard first started questioning one of his business partners who'd been skimming funds. Marcus looked at Lauren the way someone looks at a puzzle piece that doesn't quite fit. 2 days later, I heard from Kara again. "She's spiraling," she said quietly. "Sponsors are backing out. One of the vendors even asked for proof of who actually signed the checks. I said nothing. I'd made no public statement, no retaliation, no drama, just a quiet redirection of power. But the world was doing the rest for me. Lauren tried damage control. She posted a filtered photo of her and Marcus holding hands at a bridal tasting, captioned, "Nothing but love over here." But it didn't land. The comments were brutal. "Didn't you just cancel on Dalton Suites?" "So, did you pay the cancellation fee or did the owner?" "Is it true the venue owner's your mom?" That one stopped her cold. And then came the moment I knew would shift the wind entirely. A boutique podcast episode titled "The Wedding That Went Silent" aired. In it, one of the hotel staff, under anonymity, revealed that the owner had been personally wronged and that the venue had always been offered as a favor, not a business transaction. Lauren didn't have a response for that, because it was true. Not just the fact that I'd paid for everything, but the deeper truth that silence had a weight of its own. Marcus finally asked her. According to Kara, he looked her in the eye and said, "Are you hiding something from me?" Lauren didn't answer, because how could she? She couldn't explain how she'd erased her mother from the guest list while keeping her name on the invoice. She couldn't justify using someone's love like a limitless card, only to discard it when it no longer fit the aesthetic. And so the cracks began. Not publicly, not loudly, just in whispers, suspicion, distance, the unraveling of a fairy tale that was never hers to claim. And all I had done was nothing. Just one signature and one choice: silence. June arrived with a manila envelope in her hands and sorrow on her face. She didn't say much, just came through the kitchen door like she used to when we were younger women navigating PTA meetings and bake sale rosters. Only now, we were two older women who'd seen enough of life to know when words were optional. "Della," she said softly, "I didn't want you to find out this way. But I thought you deserved to know what was actually sent." I paused over the tray of tea I'd just set out. June slid the envelope across the table. Inside was a printout. An email. From Lauren. The subject line was short, almost clinical. Final venue note. Important. I felt my breath still. June didn't speak. She just let the silence stretch while I unfolded the single sheet. The text was brief, no more than a paragraph. "Dear Miss, Carter, for the sake of keeping our event elegant and free of emotional stress, I kindly ask that my mother, Della Monroe, not be included in the guest list or permitted at the venue. Her presence would be disruptive. Thank you for your understanding." Lauren. That word. Disruptive. It sat on the page like a wound dressed in pearls. I didn't react right away. My hand simply lowered the page to the table, fingers trembling only slightly as I placed it beside the framed photo of Richard and me on our wedding day. He looked so proud in that picture. Young, steady. I remember that moment. He had just whispered, "You don't look real, Dell. You look like something out of heaven." Now I was the one who didn't feel real. I stared at the email, then the photo, and back again. Two versions of womanhood collided on that wooden surface. One adorned in white lace, held by love, the other labeled a disruption to be excluded from her own daughter's joy. "She sent that to the planner directly," June whispered. "I found it in the forwarded chain. No hesitation in her tone. Just cold. Yes, that was the word. Lauren hadn't yelled at me. She hadn't even argued. There was no big scene, no slammed doors, no teary confrontation. Just a sentence in an email, one that banished me with bureaucratic politeness. I reached over and adjusted the photo frame slightly. It was off-center. Richard hated when things looked off-balance. I could almost hear him now. "Said it right, Dell. Even the little things matter." June gently touched my hand. "I'm sorry," she said. "You don't deserve this." I gave her a small smile, but it didn't reach my eyes. "It's not about deserving, June. It's about clarity." She looked confused. I clarified, more to myself than to her. All this time, I thought she just needed space. Or that maybe I'd said the wrong thing somewhere. Mothers always second-guess. But this... I tapped the paper lightly. This wasn't a miscommunication. This was a choice, a deliberate exclusion. I stood and walked toward the shelf where Richard's old cufflinks sat in a velvet box. I opened it, even though I didn't need anything inside. I just needed to open something, to do something, to not sit still. Because sitting still meant acknowledging what was lost. I whispered, "I lost my husband." Then my voice caught. And now, I've lost my daughter too. The room was silent except for the ticking of the antique clock Richard had restored for our 25th anniversary. Tick, tick, tick. Time doesn't pause for grief. It just continues, indifferent. I turned back toward June, who looked like she wanted to cry for me. I wouldn't let her. "Don't," I said gently. "Don't grieve for me yet. Just let me be quiet for a while." She nodded and rose from her chair. But before she left, she looked down at the email one last time. She didn't even capitalize mother. She murmured, almost to herself. I hadn't noticed that. But now, I couldn't unsee it. My mother's presence would be disruptive. Not even my mother. Just lowercase, as if I were a role to be managed, not a woman to be loved. June left shortly after. I sat alone in the kitchen, the email beside the photo, the tea cold, the silence full of sharp edges. I didn't tear the paper. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just placed the printout inside the wedding album Lauren had once begged me to keep safe when she was 16 and planning her dream wedding. I placed it there like a bookmark between who we were and who we had become. I didn't hear from Lauren for 2 days after June brought me the email, but Marcus did, and that was enough. He called the hotel, Dalton Suites, not for drama, but for clarity. A simple question, he would later say. Something about reconciling invoices because certain payments weren't lining up. Maybe he expected a typo or a forgotten sponsor. Instead, what he got was me. The hotel manager, not knowing any better, said cheerfully, "Yes, all contracts were under Mrs. Della Monroe. She signed off personally. Lovely woman." Apparently, there was a pause on Marcus's end of the call. Then he asked, "I'm sorry, who signed the catering?" "Mrs. Monroe. The venue, the full-course catering, the bridal suite block, even the champagne tower. All approved and prepaid. She's the listed owner of Dalton Group Holdings, actually." Dalton Group Holdings, the family corporation Richard and I built over 40 years, the same one I now quietly controlled after his passing. When Marcus hung up, he sat in the car for nearly 10 minutes. I only know this because he later told me so. Voice quiet, gaze unfocused, like a man realizing he'd been living in someone else's story. He went inside. Lauren was ironing a white linen robe she planned to wear while getting ready the morning of the wedding. There was champagne chilling in a bucket nearby. Perfumed candles flickered on the sideboard. It was supposed to be a peaceful evening. It was not. "Why didn't you tell me your mother paid for everything?" he asked. She didn't flinch, didn't look up, just kept pressing the robe, one hand smoothing the fabric with mechanical ease. "Because," she said slowly, "she didn't belong in our new family." Marcus blinked. Lauren finally looked at him. "I didn't want you to feel obligated to her." "We're building something new, Marcus. You and me. She's part of the past. I didn't want her all over this moment." He didn't say anything for a long while. Then he said, "You let her fund the entire wedding, and then barred her from attending it." Lauren pressed her lips together. "She offered the support. She made herself available. I never forced her to. You let her believe she'd be there." Lauren's tone hardened. "She would have embarrassed us. She always plays the grieving widow card. I didn't want that energy at our wedding." Marcus's hands clenched, then opened again. He looked down at the robe. "It's spotless," he said, voice strange. "What?" "The robe. You've ironed it so much, it looks like it was made in glass. Like a mannequin's costume." She scoffed. "That's dramatic." He turned and walked out of the room. Just like that. No yelling, no throwing things, no ultimatums, just a quiet departure. A silence that said more than any explosion could have. That evening, I heard a knock at my door. When I opened it, no one was there, but there was a small white envelope on the mat, sealed with a wax stamp. Inside was a note in Marcus's handwriting. "Mrs. Monroe, I owe you an apology. I see it now. I see everything. M." I folded the note slowly and placed it in my kitchen drawer, right beside the one Lauren had sent the planner. 2 voices, 2 truths, 1 daughter, 1 son-in-law. 1 line drawn, finally, between love and loyalty. It arrived the morning after Marcus slipped his letter under my door. A plain envelope, no return address. The kind of paper that felt thin but careful, like it had been folded with both trembling hands and intentional grace. The handwriting was shaky, slanted like vines that had grown wild but still held beauty. The ink smudged in places, as if the pen had stopped too long in thought. Inside was a note. "Dear Mrs. Monroe, you don't know me, but I felt I needed to write. Years ago, your husband gave my son, Peter, his first job. He was 19 then, unsure of himself, awkward in his own skin. He had dropped out of college, was too ashamed to face his father, and had just about given up when Mr. Monroe walked into the diner where I worked. I mentioned my son offhand in passing. Just a tired mother's sigh. Your husband listened. That's what I remember most. He listened." The next week, Peter was hired at the local warehouse Mr. Monroe owned. No fuss, no handout. Just a chance. When your husband passed, we sent a thank you card. We didn't expect a reply. But one came anyway. You wrote back. You told us that Richard often said, "If you can lift someone with one hand and still hold your own life steady with the other, you must." I never forgot that. Warmly, Eileen Murphy. I read the letter twice, then a third time. The words weren't dramatic. There was no punch, no twist, no anger, no grand reveal. Just remembrance. I sat down slowly at the kitchen table. The letter trembled in my hands. Not from fear, not from anger, but from something gentler, something heavier. Grief, maybe. Or its cousin. Grace. I looked up at the photo of Richard above the mantel, the one from our trip to Yosemite, where he wore that ridiculous straw hat and made me laugh so hard I almost dropped the camera. His eyes were squinting from sunlight and mischief. I whispered, "You remembered a stranger's son, and she remembered you." And I? I had spent the last several weeks trying to forget, trying to move on, trying to bury what had been done to me, or around me, or behind me. I was wrapped in wedding contracts and betrayal letters and guilt-lined silence, trying to decide how loud or how quiet I needed to be to survive my daughter's wedding day. And yet this letter, this scrap of unrequested kindness, cut through all of it like light under a locked door. Richard had lifted someone with one hand and never dropped anything else. I traced the folds of the letter, where Eileen had creased it carefully before mailing. Her hands, likely wrinkled like mine. Perhaps slower, perhaps tired. But she had written anyway. She had remembered. She had thanked. And she had reminded me, without knowing, that kindness doesn't need an audience. It doesn't scream. It doesn't demand. It doesn't plot or punish or parade. It just lives quietly in other people's lives, long after you've forgotten you ever gave it away. That morning, I didn't call June. I didn't draft a new letter to the planner. I didn't make legal adjustments or set things in motion. I just sat there and cried. Not the sharp sobs of fresh betrayal, but the quiet weeping of a woman who remembered who she used to be and realized with sudden clarity that she hadn't lost that person after all. I took out my best stationery and wrote Eileen back. It wasn't long. It didn't need to be. Dear Eileen, thank you for remembering Richard. Your letter arrived on a morning I didn't know I needed it. I will hold your words like a hand in mine. Warmly, Della Monroe. I didn't know the details at first. June kept most of it from me, trying to protect me, I suppose. But the whispers began circulating quickly, and they found their way to me, soft and startling as wind under a closed door. The wedding had been moved. That was the first headline on the small-town wedding blog. High-profile Dalton Suites ceremony abruptly canceled. Apparently, Lauren and Marcus had scrambled to book a new venue. Fast. But it wasn't just about finding a space with availability. Word had spread faster than either of them could contain. One of the first vendors they called, a high-end estate out by the lake, politely declined. Another venue owner, a friend of mine from church, told me outright, they tried calling, but once I found out who it was, I didn't take the booking. I don't work with people who treat family like that. The planner, Kara, resigned the very next day. June showed me the email. It was curt but clear. I no longer feel professionally aligned with this event. Please consider this my formal withdrawal. Vendors began pulling out one by one. The florists, the lighting crew, even the live band. Apparently, Marcus had tried to reassure them all, writing checks in a frenzy. But by then, some guests had already received notices about the last-minute change in location. Many simply chose not to come. I heard that some sent polite regrets. Others just didn't bother replying at all. And then came the phone call that confirmed everything had begun to unravel. It was June again. She spoke quietly, like someone hiding in a hallway. Della. Marcus's mother confronted Lauren. In front of everyone, my breath caught. What did she say? She said, I warned you not to bring embarrassment into our family. You didn't just sabotage a wedding. You sabotaged the foundation of your marriage. Silence sat heavy between us. I imagined Lauren's face, always so composed, so intentional, now flushed with humiliation and unraveling grace. I didn't feel joy. Not quite. This wasn't revenge. It wasn't justice in a grand, cinematic sense. But it was something quieter, something slower, like a glass slowly cracking from the inside out. Lauren had orchestrated my exclusion so precisely, had chosen optics over connection, control over compassion. And now, the very image she had worked so hard to curate was falling apart, pixel by pixel, RSVP by RSVP. I suppose it was bound to happen. You can't rip out the roots of a tree and expect the branches to keep blooming. Marcus, from what June shared, had started pulling away. It wasn't visible to most people, not yet. But she noticed the small things. His tone sharper, his silences longer. Lauren had tried to fix it all with money and speed, but this time neither worked. They say weddings bring out the truth. Not because of the vows or the flowers or the dress, but because of the pressure. It squeezes out every hidden thing, every fracture, every buried choice. I didn't dance in celebration. I didn't laugh. Instead, I walked to Richard's photo. I lit a small candle and sat with him. They're learning, I whispered, and it hurts to watch. There was no satisfaction in watching your child's world fall apart, no matter how flawed they had become. But there was relief. Relief in knowing I hadn't imagined the cruelty. Relief in seeing that the universe, somehow, still held a mirror up to choices made in secret. I hadn't said a word. I hadn't written a takedown letter or stormed into a venue with accusations. All I had done was remove the money, withdraw the hand that had quietly built their future. And the collapse had followed. Sometimes power isn't in what you say, it's in what you stop funding. The phone buzzed once, twice. I was in the kitchen, folding napkins, setting the kettle to boil like I had done every evening since Richard passed. Quiet rituals, small grounding things. I didn't recognize the number at first, but I didn't need to. It was her. I didn't pick up. Instead, I let it ring, watched it blink out, and a moment later, the voicemail icon lit up. I didn't open it right away. I made my tea first, chamomile with a touch of honey, the way Richard used to like it. The scent filled the air, warm and familiar. My hands moved without thought, steady, deliberate. Then I sat at the old oak table, the one with Richard's initials carved faintly on the bottom corner. I tapped the voicemail icon and pressed play. Lauren's voice came through, shaky, barely above a whisper. "Hi, Mom. I know I've made some awful choices. I messed up. I messed everything up. And now, I don't know how to fix it. Please, just call me." "Please." There was a pause. Then her voice cracked like thin ice. "I need you." The message ended, and I just sat there. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I didn't even feel triumph. Just a deep stillness. The kind that comes after a storm, when all you hear is the wind rearranging broken branches. The phone lay in front of me, screen dark now, silent. I reached instead for something else, an old leather-bound notebook tucked on the bookshelf. Richard's journal. He had started it after his second heart attack, filling its pages with half-formed thoughts, letters he never sent, memories too heavy to carry out loud. I flipped through the worn pages, fingers trailing the faded ink, until I landed on something underlined. Forgiveness isn't forgetting. It's choosing peace when you could choose war. I read it again, and again. He had written it after Lauren's first real rebellion, years ago, when she dropped out of college to move in with a man 10 years older who treated her like an accessory. We had begged her to reconsider. She didn't. And when it all fell apart, she came back home, smaller somehow, but proud. Richard had made her tea that night. No lecture, no "I told you so." Just that same quiet patience that made him a better man than I ever gave him credit for. And now, here I was, with the same choice. I could pick up the phone, hear her voice again, be her mother again. Comfort the child who now realized that weddings don't stitch over cruelty and shame can't be styled into silence. But something inside me had shifted. This wasn't about vengeance. It was about boundaries, about dignity, about choosing the kind of peace that didn't require pretending it hadn't happened. Because it had. She had looked me in the eye, said, "You're not invited," and walked away holding a wedding binder filled with my money and someone else's version of family. And now she needed the woman she tried to erase. I closed Richard's notebook and held it to my chest. "I hear you, my love," I whispered, "but I'm not ready to be soft yet." The phone buzzed again. A second voicemail. I didn't listen. I stood up, carried my cup of tea to the porch, and sat beneath the fading light of the evening sky. Birdsong floated in the distance. A breeze rustled the azaleas. There was no audience here, no drama, just me, a cup of tea, and silence that didn't ache. Let her wait. Let her learn. Sometimes silence isn't cruelty, it's clarity. And tonight, clarity was my gift to myself. I didn't attend the wedding, not in person, not from afar. Still, word traveled back to me like smoke from a dying fire. People talk in small towns, and whispers move faster than music. The ceremony happened, yes, but it was nothing like the spectacle Lauren had envisioned. Nothing like the glossy images in the binder she had carried like a holy book. It took place in a venue no one had heard of, a plain hall on the edge of town that usually hosted retirement banquets and middle school recitals. The walls were beige, the carpet worn. No marble staircase, no chandeliers dripping with light, just dim bulbs and folding chairs. Only a third of the guests showed up. Many had already made other plans when the first venue collapsed, and others simply didn't want to be caught in what the blogs were already calling the wedding scandal of the season. Lauren walked down the aisle without flowers in her hand, no bouquet to hide behind. The florist had pulled out days earlier, and no one replaced them. There was no music either. The string quartet she had hired canceled after Kara withdrew, and the venue had no sound system except a dusty speaker crackling with static. So Lauren's steps echoed in silence, each one sharp, hollow, final. I was told she looked beautiful, yes. Her dress still fit her like a dream. But beauty doesn't cover emptiness. Beauty doesn't fill the silence when no one claps, no one cheers, no one whispers in awe. Marcus stood at the altar, waiting. But he didn't smile. Not once. His jaw tight, his eyes darting away from hers. There was no warmth, no pride, no sense of triumph in his stance. Just resignation. Like a man who had been handed a role he no longer believed in. When Lauren finally reached him, they stood facing each other under an arch made of plastic ivy. Not roses, not orchids. Plastic ivy that drooped at the edges. The officiant spoke quickly. Words rushed as if even he wanted to leave. No one recorded it. No videographer had been hired. No photographer remained on contract. There would be no album to display on coffee tables. No framed picture of the happiest day. Just memory. And not even a tender one. Guests sat stiffly, murmuring among themselves. Some stayed out of politeness, others out of curiosity. But none radiated joy. None leaned forward with tears of happiness. And when the officiant finally said, "You may kiss the bride," Marcus hesitated. Just a beat too long. Just enough for everyone to feel the weight of absence. He kissed her, yes, but not like a man in love. Like a man fulfilling an obligation. When the applause came, it was sparse. A few claps scattered here and there like rain, falling on dry pavement. Hollow. Forced. They walked back down the aisle together, husband and wife, but no one threw petals. No music followed them. Just the sound of footsteps on cheap carpet and the heavy truth that this was not a beginning. It was an unraveling, dressed in white. I imagined Lauren's face, frozen, beautiful, but cold as stone. She had gotten her wedding, technically, but weddings aren't about technicalities. They're about hearts meeting in the open. And hers had closed off long before she reached the aisle. As for Marcus, people said his expression never softened. He didn't look at her with devotion. He looked past her, as though wondering how he had arrived here, why he had agreed to stand in that hollow hall at all. No laughter rang out at the reception. The cake was small, plain, bought last minute from a local bakery. The champagne flutes didn't match, and some guests whispered it felt more like an obligation than a celebration. No one danced. No one stayed late. And when it was done, the hall emptied quickly. Chairs stacked, crumbs swept, lights turned off. A wedding without happiness. A wedding without witness. A wedding without me. I wasn't there to see it, but I felt it. Not in my eyes, but in my bones. The collapse of something that had been built on vanity instead of love. The silence of something that had chosen exclusion over embrace. Lauren had wanted a perfect stage. Instead, she got a hollow play, and when the curtain fell, no one clapped. I knew I wouldn't be there when the vows were spoken, when the cake was cut, when the last chair scraped against the floor. But I also knew I had one last thing to say, not with my voice, not with my presence, but with something quieter. So, I wrote a letter. I sat at Richard's old desk the night before, the same desk where he signed contracts and balanced ledgers, where he sometimes fell asleep with ink stains on his fingers. I pulled out a single sheet of thick stationery, the kind he always insisted on keeping for serious words. And I wrote, "Lauren," I began, the ink trembling under my hand though my resolve stayed steady. "You didn't uninvite me from the wedding. You uninvited yourself from a love that had no conditions." I paused, listening to the faint hum of the night outside. My chest ached, but my hand kept moving. "I wish you peace, even if it's without me." That was all. Short, simple, a truth pared down to its bare bones. I folded the page, slipped it into an envelope, and sealed it with the same wax stamp Richard once used for business correspondence. Then I handed it to Kara, the planner who had already stepped away but still cared enough to meet me in the parking lot of her office. "Will you make sure she gets this?" I asked. Kara held the envelope like it was fragile glass. "Are you sure?" I nodded. She needs to read it. Whether she understands it now or later, that's not mine to control. Kara's eyes softened. I've seen many mothers scream at their daughters over centerpieces or guest lists. But you... She shook her head. "You're different. You're quiet. And somehow that feels louder than all the shouting." I didn't answer. I just touched her hand, whispered thanks, and walked away. Later, after the ceremony ended in its hollow silence, after the reception limped on without joy, Kara slipped the envelope onto the table where Lauren sat. I wasn't there to see it, but Kara told me afterward. Lauren's hands trembled when she recognized my handwriting. At first, she hesitated, as if afraid to open it. Perhaps she thought it contained anger, or demands, or bitterness. But then she broke the seal. She read the first line, and her lips parted. She read the second line, and her fingers shook harder. By the time her eyes reached the closing words, the tears came. Not the staged tears of a bride posing for pictures. Not the delicate ones dabbed away with a napkin for effect. But the raw kind. The kind you don't control. Shoulders shaking, breath catching, mascara streaking down a face that had been sculpted to perfection just hours before. Kara said no one approached her. Marcus looked from across the room, uncertain, but he didn't move. Guests whispered, unsure of what had pierced her composure so suddenly. But Lauren... She sat there, clutching that single page as though it weighed more than all the flowers she'd ordered, more than the dress she wore, more than the hall she had tried to fill with borrowed grandeur. And she cried. For the first time, truly cried. Maybe she finally understood. Maybe she finally saw that my silence wasn't absence. that my withdrawal wasn't neglect, that the line she had drawn, so sharp and deliberate, had only carved her own isolation. I didn't need to know exactly what she felt in that moment. It wasn't about me anymore. It was about her reckoning with herself, and about me, choosing peace when I could have chosen war. That night, while she held my letter, I sat at home with Richard's journal open in front of me. I ran my fingers over his words again. Forgiveness isn't forgetting. It's choosing peace when you could choose war. I poured myself another cup of tea, breathed in the steam, and let the quiet fill me. I hadn't spoken in months. I hadn't screamed. I hadn't fought. All I had done was step back, withdraw what was mine, and leave behind one page of truth. And that was enough. Because sometimes the loudest sound a mother can make is silence wrapped in love. A year passed in small rituals, the whistle of the kettle at dusk, refilling Richard's fountain pen and writing single lines in a private ledger. Peace did not arrive all at once. It gathered in layers, winter tea steam, April lilacs, a drawer that no longer ached with unopened voicemails. Edenrise ran with a steadier hand, staff promoted from within, vendors briefed on dignity clauses. I trained managers to listen before they spoke. I did not call Lauren. On New Year's Day, I wrote one sentence in Richard's journal. Choosing peace is a daily act. In late spring, the mail came early. The truck clattered away. A single postcard waited in the box. No return address, only a neat hand I knew. On the front, a washed watercolor of a pale horizon. On the back, 6 words above a small square of tape holding a photograph. Her name is Delaney. I thought you should know. I stood by the mailbox and let the sentence land. Delaney A.D. name. Soft as linen, strong as a door held open. The photograph was 2 by 3, a baby girl bundled in a knitted blanket the color of clouds. A tiny fist against her cheek, eyes wide and clear. Not blue, not green. That sea gray Richard carried his whole life, with a flicker of mischief in the light. My breath changed. Not a gasp. A widening, like a window unlocked in a room I had kept shut. I took the postcard inside and put the kettle on. The house held a new silence, not heavy now. I set the photograph on the table and felt its small gravity. She had his eyes. She had my mother's mouth. It felt impossible and exactly right. I wanted to be happy. I wanted to be sad. Both arrived and stood beside me like old companions. Joy for the life beginning. Grief for the year, lost to pride and performance. A quiet thread of anger that sat down when the water boiled. I poured tea and read the sentence again. Her name is Delaney. I thought you should know. No apology, no pleas, no invitation. Just a small door, left on the latch. I carried the photograph to Richard's chair and sat. I told him what the card did not say, that I am older now and softer at the edges, that I can forgive without forgetting, that I will not trade my dignity for access, not even to a bassinet full of stars. I told him I see him in this child, that if the day ever comes, I will teach her to plant tomatoes and to speak with her head high and her heart steady. I considered writing back. I even chose a card, cream with a thin navy border. I pictured one line, "Thank you for telling me her name." Then I set the card aside. Forgiveness is not a sprint. It is a posture, a way of standing without closing the door. I slipped the photograph into my wallet, behind the plastic window where Richard's smile lives. The edges fit just so. Something in me settled. I do not know whether this is joy or a gentler cousin, I only know it warmed the room. That afternoon, June stopped by with strawberries. We sat on the porch and ate them from the carton. I showed her the postcard. She studied the picture and nodded. She has his gaze, June said. The look that listens. I laughed. Then I did not. We let the wind finish our sentences. As evening fell, I walked the garden and checked the peonies for ants. Somewhere, a neighbor's radio played a love song from a decade that still remembers me. I thought of Lauren, perhaps tired, perhaps learning, perhaps holding her baby and finding that the world softens when you stop arranging it. I did not call. I did not text. I stood under the porch light and whispered a blessing into the dark. For the child with a D name, for the mother finding her way, for the man who taught me that love holds steady when pride lets go. Then I went inside and set another place at the table in my mind. I kept the photograph in my wallet. I carried it to the market, to the bank, to the quiet pew on Sunday where I thank the invisible for the visible. Sometimes waiting is not emptiness. Sometimes it is room. I smiled, warm but light. The kettle clicked off. The house exhaled. For the first time in a long time, the future did not sound like a door closing. It sounded like footsteps approaching, unhurried and true. I let them come. A year has passed. The courtyard smells of rosemary and clean stone. The fountain keeps time like a quiet metronome. I am back at Edenrise, not guarding relics, but walking rooms I redesigned. Heavy drapes are gone. Light moves freely. Paths are wider. The plantings are native and patient. This is my garden, a pocket behind the west veranda with a bench from Richard's first inn. Pavers curve like commas, asking the day to continue. I place my old teacup on the table. The hairline crack still catches sun. Beside it rests a smaller cup with a blue rim. Empty, waiting without pressure. Delaney's photo, once in my wallet, now sits in a silver frame. Ocean gray eyes, the same spark Richard carried. I set the frame where the steam will curl toward it. I do not speak to the picture. I let the warmth do the talking. Guests wander past hedges and read the new plaques. One explains our scholarship fund. Another notes the carbon-neutral kitchen. I feel the steady pride of a craftsperson whose lines finally run true. June steps through the arch with a cream folder tied in navy ribbon. She sets it down like something alive. Launch schedule, she says. And the plaque proofs. 2 weeks. The cover reads, Whitmore House, in memory of Richard. Inside, a donor list, a program, a short inscription for the foyer. June taps the sentence. I kept it, exactly. Built on love, stewarded with courage, open to anyone who needs a beginning. He would have liked that, I say. He would have liked that you built it, she answers. Wind brushes rosemary against my wrist. I pour 2 cups of tea. We sit without hurry. June opens her calendar. Media walk through Tuesday. Staff blessing Thursday. Families Saturday. The plaque arrives Monday. And the childcare room received final approval. What did you name it? Delaney Corner. With your permission. You have it, I say. We fall quiet and listen to the fountain and a distant clatter from the kitchen. I think about the year. Postcards that did not demand replies. A voicemail I never returned. A child with a name that starts where mine starts. Love has changed shape. It did not vanish. June glances at the small cup. Expecting company? Someday, I say. Today I am practicing. She smiles. The staff list is posted. Housekeepers, grounds crew, dishwashers, then everyone else. You asked for that order. They hold the place together. I answer. They open the day. June pulls a thin envelope from the folder. Dedication remarks. I trimmed anything apologetic. I read the first paragraph, then look up at the garden. Good, I say. This time it is mine, not inherited, created. We let the sentence stand between us. Ownership used to frighten me. Now it feels like stewardship with a pulse. I think of the first year Richard and I ran a 12-room motor lodge, of sheets we pressed by hand, of nights, he said, if we keep one door open for someone tired, we have done enough. Sun slides through the olive branches and brightens the table. The silver frame glows. Delaney's eyes seem awake. I slide a second frame from my journal. Richard in his straw hat at Yosemite. I add a third, a candid of me from the morning we reopened the lobby. The three sit like small anchors. June stands. Walk through? In a minute, I say. Let the light finish its work. She squeezes my shoulder and steps toward the veranda. The garden settles again. Somewhere a bell rings for shift change. I breathe in rosemary, tea, and sunlight. I gather the folder and close it. The schedule feels clear, not crowded, not thin. Tuesday will bring questions. Thursday will hold hands. Saturday will feel like a family reunion with extra chairs. Whitmore House will open under a simple vow. No guest will need to earn their welcome. I look at the smaller cup and do not move it. I do not know when it will be used. I only know it belongs on this table. On the bench, the three frames lean toward one another as if listening. Richard's grin, my steadier gaze. Delaney wrapped like a small lighthouse. The sun links them with a narrow band of gold. I stand and face the glass door to the foyer. In the reflection, I see what the light sees. Not an empire rescued, but a home remade. Not noise, not spectacle. Just work that holds. Inside, staff voices rise and fall as they set for the afternoon tasting. I will meet them in a moment and ask what they need. Before I go, I place my palm flat on the warm wood of the table and make a quiet promise to choose peace again tomorrow, to keep a chair open, to keep the door easy on its hinges. Then I lift the folder and walk inside. Behind me, the garden keeps our places. As the door closes, a last ribbon of light stretches across the three frames and rests there. Richard, me, and the little face that echoes us both, held together by ordinary, generous day.